Hey guys, there are two very common photo editing tools that when used together can help you to make amazing dynamic images. I use these two together all the time and I want to share them with you. But first, we need to take an image. Let's go. Princess Point, I have found what I'm looking for. It is a tree that is lying in the water. This tree looks like it is still partially alive, which is really neat. And I would like to capture this image. Now here is the question. What do you see here? When you take an image with a RAW file or even a JPEG, you have a 2D image. It's just flat. It's like holding a piece of paper and you see the picture. What we want is to create dynamic images where it feels like there's depth and maybe even movement, and it's coming out of the paper and it's just speaking to you. What draws my eye is the texture in the log, the way that it's moving into the distance. The human eye will notice some things and eliminate some others. So that's what you want to do with your image. And when you're editing, you can do that very simply just by putting two tools together. And I'm going to show you how to do that. But first, let's capture this image. Great. Okay, let's go back and see what we're going to do with it. Let's take a look at the image of the log that we captured. So we've brought the image into Lightroom and we're going to work with it in both Lightroom and Photoshop. And this is a method that I use on a lot of my images all of the time to make them look a little bit more dynamic. So we're just going to make some quick edits here in Lightroom, and then we're going to send it over to Photoshop where I'm going to show you what I love to do to make my images look more dynamic. Okay, I've done some quick edits. I've just brought up the exposure just a little bit and tweaked a couple of settings, and now I'm going to edit in Adobe Photoshop. I right click on the thumbnail at the bottom, click on Edit in Adobe Photoshop. Now, this image is very flat. Like I said, it's a raw image. I would like to make it more dynamic and to show what I really saw there. And what I saw was the grass in the foreground. It was beautiful. And then I saw this really interesting twisted log. The rest of it was just to complement the scene, but those are the things that I really want my eye drawn to. Now to do this, I'm going to use layers, and I'm going to use it in conjunction with Adobe Camera Raw. Now layers are definitely something that people use all the time when they're editing images because they are so fantastic. I'm going to give you a little bit of just a quick overview of what layers do for your image. So here's my image, okay? Let's say this is going to be bad. Okay, here's my image. This is me. Okay, now I'm going to make some edits to this raw file, or if you shoot JPEG, you can do that as well. So I've got this image, and say I want to make the image brighter. Well, I can add a layer to it, and by doing that, it's like almost like adding a sheet of glass on top of it. This isn't see-through, but just picture this with me here. Add a layer on top of it. I can see through this layer, even though I know you can't, to the underlying layer. So I'm going to add a brightness and contrast layer on top of this image of me. And I am going to make changes to the brightness and contrast just to this layer. So what's going to happen is you are going to see me with more brightness and contrast. So you have a layer that is brightness and contrast. You've made a change to the underlying image. Now, again, the layer is like a sheet of glass. Now maybe I want to make a change to the shadows. I want to bring the shadows down a little bit darker. I can add another layer and make my changes there onto this layer. Then I could maybe add another layer for saturation. So I want the image to be brighter, more bold. Well, I can change that on this layer. And what you have is a stack of changes on top of your image. And the great thing about doing it this way is that they're non-destructive, which means that your original image on the bottom is never changed. And you can change, edit, or eliminate any of these layers, and it doesn't matter in what order you do it. So layers are fantastic, but there's another part about layers that make them even more wonderful, and that is the masks. In Adobe Photoshop, on the right hand side, if you have your workspace set up this way, you will see a box that says layers in the corner, and it lists there for you the layers that you have. Now, I have the background layer, which is the original image that I imported from Lightroom into Photoshop. And then I made some changes to it by getting rid of spots on the lens and just doing a general cleanup. And that is in my layer 1. Okay, so I can even rename that layer. And I can just call it cleanup so that I know that that's what it is. You don't have to rename your layers, but anyway, so this cleanup layer, this eyeball will turn it on and off. And just to show you, if I turn off my cleanup layer, the spots will come back and you'll see right in the middle there's a big one. And so just in general, well, it's not a big change, but you can see what happens. Now you can make adjustments to your image using layers, like I have already explained. So I can make a brightness and contrast layer, and I can play around with that. So I can bring the brightness down, I can bring the contrast up, and there's that layer. I could make a saturation layer. Like I said, I could bring my saturation up. So now the image is very crazy colors, but I can always go and turn these layers off or on. So now if I've turned off my brightness and contrast layer, the hue saturation layer is still on, so it is being applied to the layer beneath it. The way layers work is that whatever's on top is being applied to whatever is underneath it. If I were to move my hue saturation layer down below the cleanup layer, you're not going to see it anymore because what's on top is the cleanup layer image, and that's what you're going to see. So we have layers and we have masks. The way masks work is a little bit interesting. So I am going to make a layer, just a quick one, to explain how this works. Let's add a curves layer, and what I'm going to do is make the darks extremely dark and the whites very white. Okay, so I have a curves layer and I have applied this change to everything below it. And what you're going to see when you add this layer is that there is a white box beside it when it comes up. And the white box beside it is your mask, okay? What the mask does is it allows you to select which areas of the image you want it to be applied to. A mask, anything that is white on that mask is going to be visible. Anything that is black is going to be invisible. Now, what you're going to do is make sure, so I've got my curves layer highlighted here, and this circle on the left hand side, if I click on that, this allows me to make adjustments to it below. The right hand side has the white mask. White means that this curves layer is now being applied to everything in the image below, the entire surface of that image. If I click on it to make sure it's activated, this white box, I've activated my mask, and what I want to do is come over here to the left, select my paintbrush tool. I can paint black paint onto the mask. adding black to that mask, and the areas of the black on the mask are no longer going to have that curves layer applied to it. So now you can see the area on the right hand side of my image does not have the curves layer applied to it, and the area on the left hand side does. So masks and layers, okay, this is just the basics of how they work. If you have any questions about how they work, please ask them below and I'll try to clarify for you. What I'm going to do is, and this is the part that's so exciting, I am going to use the layers and masks with Adobe Camera Raw. Adobe Camera Raw is a plugin in Adobe Photoshop. So if you have Adobe Photoshop, you have Camera Raw. And what it is you can add this filter to a layer and you can make adjustments just like you would in Lightroom. It's very, very similar to Lightroom. The sliders are almost exactly the same. So what I do is I'm going to make a Camera Raw filter and then apply it to my image in Photoshop as a layer, and then I'm going to mask it so that I only make those adjustments in certain areas. I love, love, love this because it gives me so much control over my image. I'll show you what I mean. First, I'm going to delete this curves layer because it's absolutely awful. Okay, so we're back to our image, the cleanup image, and I am going to duplicate it because I'm going to do some different work to it. So I've renamed it Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to go up to the top, click on Filter, click on Camera Raw Filter, and it's going to bring up a new box. I can make changes just like I did in Adobe Lightroom. I have a bunch of different tabs here up at the top and then the adjustment sliders below. I would like to emphasize the bark on the tree, okay? And for that, I want to use clarity. I want to bring the clarity up a bit. Now, when I bring the clarity up, it makes the rest of the image look too harsh. So I want to bring it up to about 15, and then I'm going to click on OK at the bottom, and that is going to be applied to my entire image on the layer that I opened Adobe Camera Raw for. So to add a mask, you'll notice that there's no white box beside Camera Raw here. So I am going to add one, and that is this little rectangle with a black circle in the middle, and I've added a mask beside it. Just make sure your layer is highlighted. When I do that, I can go and I can paint black over the areas of the image that I don't want it to be applied to. However, in this instance, because I only want it to be applied to the log itself, it's much faster for me if I first invert the mask. Down below here, it says invert, and that changes the whole mask to black, which means it's not applied at all to this image. So I'm going to make my paintbrush white so that I can decide where I want it to be applied. So I am going to add it to the tree. So now I just have clarity on my tree in an adjustment layer. That means that I will still be able to turn it on and off, which is fantastic. Okay, the next adjustment layer I want to do is I want to add some moodiness to the sky to bring it down. It's very plain looking here, but I can see that there's some cloud in it, and I'm going to duplicate a layer and do the exact same thing that I did for the clarity. There are lots of different ways to do this, by the way. I just want to let you know there are tons of different ways. However, I like this method because it allows me to do a few certain things that can't really be done as easily another way. One of those things is the ability to adjust your mask after the fact. Just like you can turn on and off layers, you can also change your mask and expand them or shrink them to suit your needs as you go along with your editing. If you apply a Camera Raw filter to the entire image, you will still be able to apply more of that same filter to the whole image just by adjusting your mask. If you use a brush and do a selective edit in the Camera Raw filter, then you will only have that area with that adjustment, and you won't be able to expand it to other areas of the image after the fact. So there you have it. Final image. If you want to, you can merge some of the layers so that you can continue to make edits like this. It's just a very, very powerful tool, I think, to harness the power of Adobe Camera Raw and the power of Adobe Photoshop, put them together and really make a dynamic image. So here's the difference between the original image and the one that I think is more dynamic and draws your eye in to the log in the water. Guys, you are amazing. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.